Yeah, I think so.
Everyone knows the place where all the lights are bright is old Missoula town. It started in Hellgate City on the Mullen Road when President Grant built the fort and calmed the fear. Remember when H.O. Bell brought in his Tin Lizzie and Cold Highlander was your 5-cent beer? Remember when Wild Bill Kelly ran for first and 10? We stood and cheered when Jolson played the Wilma then. Everyone knows the place no matter where or when. They say hello and where you're from and how you been. You say, well, I'm from Missoula too. Didn't we meet on Higgins Avenue? Didn't we light the flame and dance up Front Street, romping through the lair of the grizzly bear? And maybe they don't give a damn down in Bozeman or Butte up west. The folks don't fool around. Everyone knows the place where all the lights are bright is old Missoula town. Everyone goes across a bridge to cruise the drag at night.
Everyone goes down to the stocks to drink a whole bunch of light.
I stretch one running through the garden under the bridge tonight.
Everyone knows the place where all the lights are bright is old Missoula town. It started in Hellgate City on the Mullen Road when President Grant built the fort and calmed the fear. Remember when H.O. Bell brought in his Tin Lizzie and Cold Highlander was your 5-cent beer? Remember when Wild Bill Kelly ran for first and 10? We stood and cheered when Jolson played the Wilma then. Everyone knows the place no matter where or when. They say hello and where you from and how you been. You say, well, I'm from Missoula too. Didn't we meet on Higgins Avenue? Didn't we light the flame and dance up Front Street, romping through the lair of the grizzly bear? And maybe they don't give a damn down in Bozeman or Butte up west. The folks don't fool around. Everyone knows the place where all the lights are bright is old Missoula town. Everyone goes up Patty Canyon for a keg at night.
Everyone goes down to Warden's to buy that keg, damn right.
And every couple of years, somebody goes up on Mount Sentinel and starts a fire. That's right.
Everyone knows the place where all the lights are bright is old Missoula town.
Missoula!
A Carousel for Missoula opened its doors in May of 1995. From a combined effort of support from the entire community, which included the help from artist Chuck Caprich, 100,000 hours went into carving, sanding, painting, restoring an antique frame and motor in a jewel box building by volunteers from here. In 2001, the Dragon Hollow Play Area was built again by volunteers in 9 days. The Carousel and Dragon Hollow have become an icon for the Missoula community. We are here to celebrate that effort and its place in western Montana by presenting this evening titled, It's All About a Horse. Tonight, the Carousel's friends, former president and board member Mr. Randy Cox, has made available special chosen wines from his extensive wine cellar to give this evening a colorful glow. We are so thankful to you folks could be here with us tonight for this special event. Here at the Cafe Dolce, which is a Mediterranean-based, ingredient-driven restaurant, they are passionate about food, wine, and treating their customers like family. We find here the perfect atmosphere to invite the family of Carousel supporters for this special event. May I make special mention of Kim Brigham of the Missoulian for the Sunday paper front page story about this evening's sold-out event. Missoula's 50th mayor is in the house. As you all know, our mayor has worked to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to help our friends and neighbors in our community. His triumphs include the open space bond, affordable housing, zoning regulations, and currently in the city's purchase of our water system. He served by appointment on the State of Gaming Council, was appointed to the Board of Directors of the Montana League of Cities and the Executive Board of the University of Montana. He was an award-winning writer and editor for the Missoulian and currently continues to own and operate with his lovely wife, Tracy, a small business here in Missoula. He's a graduate of the University of Montana and lives up in the Rattlesnake. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished mayor, Mr. John Engen.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve, for that kind introduction. It has been my experience that no one has cruised the drag in Missoula since about 1990. So, I am going to update some of the lyrics for the Singing Sons of Beaches, which is what mayors are allowed to say, actually. It is lovely to see you. I am going to be in and out this evening. I have done a couple of auctions this weekend. No one got hurt, and I am a huge fan of what's happening here, and I'm also a huge fan of Cafe Dolce, the good folks here who turned a gas station into this, ladies and gentlemen, which is pretty impressive. So there was a time when I would have made a number of jokes about horses being afraid when I stepped up. But after having my stomach cut out, I can tell you that I would be more than willing to ride a horse, except my mother reminded me that I am horribly allergic to horses. So if I were to tell you a story about a horse this evening, it would be a horse of a different color. I can tell you, however, that when Teresa Cox and I first met, I was working at the Missoulian. I was a newspaper guy once upon a time, and I had the lovely experience of recognizing through the work that Teresa and Chuck and a ton of volunteers had done at that time, that when citizens work together for the right reasons, at the right time, for the right cause, miracles ensue. And so I will tell you this evening that in my experience, the Carousel for Missoula is a miracle. It's a miracle of people electing to work together. It's a miracle of people making choices. And really, it's a miracle of sustainability. So 20 years later, a little more, right? 20 years later, folks are still showing up. Folks still recognize the value of cutting into wood and making a community icon. Folks recognize the value of cutting into wood and making kids happy. Folks recognize the value of cutting into wood and making new friends. Folks recognize the value of cutting into wood and making a place. What this is about tonight is about our respect, our veneration for continuing to make a place. Missoula, Montana ain't like no other place in the country. And we have lots of reasons to be proud for that fact, not the least of which this evening is the fact that Missoula, Montana is home for a carousel like no other in the nation, ladies and gentlemen. So what you're going to hear tonight are stories from people who matter, about a place that matters and a cause that matters. And at some point, you may be asked to dig deep. You may be asked to reach into your pockets. Ann Boone just tapped John Talbot on the shoulder, saying, "You're going to be asked to dig deep," right? But the reasons are just, the reasons are meaningful, and our place will matter for a very long time because you elected to show up, you elected to participate, and you elected to hear a story about a man or a woman and a horse. Ladies and gentlemen, lovely to see you. Enjoy the evening. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Smoke Elsner.
Anyway, we got there and the guests all unloaded. We got all our tents up and got our kitchen all set up and got ready to cook and everything. And the horses, as soon as we get to camp, we turn all the mules loose right away. Because the mules won't leave a horse. They always stick right with the horses. But at any rate, we turned all the mules loose and bailed a couple of the other horses and turned them out. Kept some of the horses in so that we didn't lose them that night. And then we went ahead with our supper and fishing, and then we sat around the campfire and told a lot of good stories, you know, about the Danaher and about Ursus Hill and all that kind of thing. That's Bear Hill, by the way. That's where the university has actually a fossil come out of that mountain. But at any rate, we went ahead and had our campfire, and as the time went on that night, got kind of late, and the guests started to drift off to their tents. So that was time when my wrangler and I, we always turned all our horses loose so that they'd graze at night. So what we did is we saddled up. I saddled up Cannonball, and another one of my wranglers, he saddled up a little horse called Kate. And we throwed our bedrolls across there and a couple of manis and a rope and went down. I went up the trail towards Big Prairie, north, and got about a mile away from camp and rolled out my bedroll and went overhead and picketed my horse, Cannonball. He was picketed on a 30-foot line to 1 foot. And I stayed just outside that circle, by the way, because, you know, if you're inside that and he runs around there, he might tip you over pretty good. But at any rate, we went ahead. My other wrangler, he went the other way, and he went down towards Limestone Creek and camped there. And all we did is we sleep on the trail so that our horses don't go home. And we were just talking about that just a few minutes ago. And that keeps our horses in the hills. So in the meantime, the other wrangler turned all the horses loose, with some of them with bells on, so we could hear where they're at. And anyway, I crawled in, picketed old Cannonball out there and tied him to the rope, and he got something to eat. And I crawled in my sleeping bag, throwed a manty tarp over me, which is a big piece of canvas, about 7 by 8 feet, and went to sleep. Didn't think a thing about it. Every once in a while I'd wake up, and I could hear the bells, so we still had our horses. They were still below us somewhere. So as night went on, morning came along, geez, I knew it was daylight, but I had the tarp up over my head, you know, and but it was something real heavy on me, really heavy. Geez, I flipped open the tarp real quick, about 4 inches of good wet snow. Boy, man, I got up and shook and I rolled up my sleeping bag, and I saw Cannonball. He was still standing over there. He was standing pretty close to me, about the length of this building away from me. And he was standing there watching me. So I rolled up my bedroll and rolled up the tarps and everything and put him on the saddle, throwed the saddle on Cannonball and went to go to get on and got on his back, turned towards the trail, and I could still hear the bells. So that was pretty good. But I didn't go just a little ways until there were grizzly tracks. A grizzly had walked all around my sleeping bag at least twice. And I could see where Cannonball had come right over to where I was sleeping, about from here to this gentleman here, and stood right there and watched me. So that's kind of the story of Cannonball. Thank you.
Thank you, Smoke, so much. Our next special guest is a legendary Western artist. We have all seen his work all around town, in the media, and even in corporate logos all over this fine community. He is a colorful storyteller and brings on memories of the likes of other legendary American and Western artists. His paintings bring on dreams of the West as it comes to life in his work. From that, it isn't hard to imagine that he calls Montana home. And we here are blessed that he does. In fact, we all share his dreams when we when we stare at his inspiring work. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Larry Perney.
Hey, Larry.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. It's a hard act to follow. For two reasons. First of all, this guy's got all the experience and I have all the fantasy. The second is that I make pictures, and at a very early age, words didn't cut it for me, and that's why I've made pictures most of my life, but I seem to keep getting into these experiences to verbalize what I'm trying to do visually. So that will be my attempt on my favorite horse story that continues to live on. About 38 years ago, I traveled a long, long way from a 15-year career in advertising and marketing back in the East and landed on the North Shore of Flathead Lake in a little cabin not too far outside of Big Fork. That was to live my dream as a Western artist. It never went away. And no matter how much success I had doing other kinds of pictures, like advertising or some of the various things that people have seen me do since I moved to Missoula, the soul says, paint the West. It started when I was 5 and it's still alive now, but I couldn't find the way to do it. And that's where my horse story started, because it was my horse that took me from that career that made no sense to leave, to come out here to do something that everybody back east said, who in the heck wants cowboy art? I got settled in that little cabin, and about a month and a half, 2 months later, I took my horse into a saloon up in Carousel. And they came out with this beautiful, long-legged filly who 2 years later became my wife, Irene, my best friend, and my sales agent, because she found out real quick that this artist couldn't sell his own art worth a darn. If we were going to survive, she was going to have to sell it. I'll just make it. I kept riding that horse through over 3,000 paintings that we have now distributed throughout the United States and other continents. And I can tell you truly, by far, the horse appears in more of my art than any other symbol of the West. And that's why when Mayor John says what he does, there's no sense to this carousel. There isn't a single person in this room that came here because it made sense. We love the horse and what that represents to us. In my case, it got me through all those paintings when I, quite honestly, didn't have the skills to share them with anybody, but that horse kept riding me and riding me and riding me. I've never had painter's block because I learned early, all I got to do is get on one of my horses, start painting, and I'm off and running. I don't even have to finish the painting. I just need that horse and that energy, that same energy that's in all your souls and why you took the time out of your life to come here to spend time with people of common fantasy, common spirit, common appreciation for what this horse represents to us who love the West. If you don't love the West, this conversation you should probably walk out of. If you do, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Spiritually, the horse is my muse. When artists get around and talk, there's some real highfalutin muses that get talked about out there, and I usually stop the conversation with saying, well, it's been a horse my whole way. I'm still riding a horse. It doesn't lose its excitement and energy for me. I think any of you who follow my paintings will see that even today. Don't paint quite as many of them. Don't travel quite as far to sell them. But we have an audience who has that same love for the horse that I've had this whole trip and hopefully will continue to my last days. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Larry Purdy. Our next guest is from Great Falls. He attended MSU in agriculture and reminded me to take my hat off at the dinner table tonight. He competed at the first college rodeo finals at the Cow Palace, was inducted into the Montana Legends of Rodeo in Great Falls and the Wall of Fame in Billings. A recently retired board member of the Montana Historical Society. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Hall of Fame rodeo announcer, Mr. Bill Holt.
Thank you very much. You know, the hardest thing in the world is to talk to people that you know. If you're up in a stand, I had a crowd of 100,000 people. Now you maybe think I'm lying, but I'm not, at Los Angeles. And you could talk to them and they couldn't see you, so it was very comfortable. When you get into a room like this and you've got people that I know very well and they look at you, you know you can't exaggerate anything. But we're talking about horses, and I probably know of a horse, and we were personal friends because I once in a while fed him, that was called Trail's End. Trail's End was a bucking horse, and he was owned by Oral Zumo. Couldn't think of Oral's name. Oral was a man that ranched in Augusta, came over, bought the ranch out of, he leased the ranch, the Miller Creek Ranch as it's still known. And he had Trail's End, and he bought Trail's End from a gentleman in Victor's. So Trail's End was a native of Montana. Trail's End was a horse that you could put a child on and lead him around and nothing would happen. You could walk into an arena, or into a pen, I should say, of horses, and you could feed this horse and pet him. But he didn't like anything on his back. He started out as a pack horse, and he bucked off the pack. He did not like to be anything on his back. And if you think that I'm not telling you the truth, you go talk to Smoke. Anyway, he had some experience with him. Anyway, there was nobody could break the horse. even the professionals, they just could not do it. Now this horse was partly Morgan, partly Renegade. Anyway, he was a horse that was not real small, but you wouldn't call him big. 15 hand smoke, about that. And you all wonder, what the hell is a hand? This is a hand, and then they measure it up from that. That'd be 15 times, and they're measured by the tip of their withers. Now, a wither is when the neck comes down and the mane is no longer there. That's the wither. But this horse would not stand for anybody on this horse's back. Oral Zumo tried him several times, and then he looked and thought, and he said, if they don't like anybody on the back, maybe he'll buck. Well, the horse found his liking. He was a saddle bronc horse. A saddle bronc horse is different than a bareback. Bareback's ridden with a rigging. The saddle bronc is ridden with a saddle. And they call them association saddles. All saddles were the same. And they were a saddle that was designed not to hurt the horse. In other words, you couldn't cut the horse in half with a cinch and such as that. This is cowboy talk when I say that, because they'd cinch them up so tight they couldn't buck. Anyway, Trail's End felt like he was a celebrity when he got out in the arena. Loved the clapping, loved everything, and they tried him and we found his niche. There's nobody that could, if you could stay on that horse 10 seconds, you were a champion. If you went down to the ground, there was, what, 64, I've got all this written down, but I'm not going to read it to you. 65 riders and 4 rode the horse during his career. 12-year career. If you stayed on the horse and the whistle blew, you were going to win some money. And I'm not going to take any longer because I'm not giving very much time. You take somebody that's been an announcer and you tell them you got 3 minutes, how in the hell can you talk in 3 minutes? So I want to thank you. I want to thank for being invited here, and we see a lot of friends, and it's wonderful to share an evening with you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Tony Incashola is a Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribal elder. He has been serving the Salish Ponderay Culture Committee for over 40 years. His service began with a call from another visionary named Johnny Arlee, who asked Tony if he would help to work with him on preserving the Salish culture. Tony had the background for it. He has always lived a traditional way of life, growing up with his grandparents, learning the language and the customs. He served in the U.S. military and soon after returned to the Flathead Reservation where he lives today in St. Ignatius. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tony Incashola.
Tony Incashola has left the building. Thank you all this evening. I want to thank all of you for, again, me to be part of your evening this morning for a very special event, very special occasion. We all know that the horse has played an important role in all of us, in all of our lives, our children and our grandchildren. It has changed how we did things in this world. When the first horses arrived here around 1540, when the Spaniards brought them here, when Cordova and De Soto brought them here. And when he brought all those horses here and put them ashore here, a lot of them naturally escaped, became wild. And so what I'm going to tell you a little bit about 3 minutes of history that lasted a few thousand years, how the native people first encountered the horse. The horse, of course, there's a lot of people, met and encountered the horses the first time. But this one is going to be about the Salish and the Pend Oreille. The Pend Oreille that you know today is actually Carousel people. Carousel people or the Camas people. They're all the way from eastern Washington all the way up to here in Montana. The Salish people are a little bit further south. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. And, you know, before the horses, the travel, the mode of travel was foot. People that had to gather food, had to do things on a daily basis on foot. If you missed a plant and when it was ready, you were going to be without that coming winter. So it was important to follow the seasons of the plants as you gathered and prepared for the winter months, and did it on foot. Back then, the dog that was been around for quite a while was probably one of the main modes of transportation, hauling things. But you couldn't do very much with the dog. And so, even though you couldn't, it played an important role in the way things were carried, other than your own back. So, as the people here, what we call the Carousel or the Pend Oreille, were getting ready to go follow the seasons, to go hunting, to gather food, they had a large encampment somewhere near here. And as they got ready, prepared to go hunting, you always have scouts, you always have people looking out. And he had a group of people, scouts, that went on up on top of the ridge to kind of scout around to see what was over on the other side. So as they got up on top, and they stopped there and they were looking around here, and in the distance, way in the distance, they could see something coming. A lot of things, kind of maybe 30, 40 specks coming this way. Naturally, they thought it was probably the enemy. So they got ready, they got down further down the hill on the other side, and they kind of prepared themselves for an encounter and a battle. They were all waiting there. Pretty soon they get closer and closer. And the nerves and anticipation kind of got, it gets everybody jittery. And as they got closer, they started looking and they started getting confused. They looked again and they looked at each other. They said it looked like an elk coming. So they looked again and they thought it was a man. So that was confusing. So they seen this looked like a half elk and a half man. And so they got nervous and got a little scared. They started backing up. They started retreating. After a period of time, they finally got to where they were at, and they were ready to leave. They were ready to leave or shoot or kill. And finally they heard a voice saying, "Don't be scared. Don't be scared. We come here to trade." And with that confusion, they were looking at this half human, half animal. They didn't know what to do. Finally, one of the people said, "We are Nespers. We come to trade." Then they felt a little more comfortable and they walked further, closer, and they seen this animal that looked like an elk to them, plus a human on top of it. And they asked, "Well, what is it? What you got there?" They said, "This is our mode of transportation. It's something new. We come to trade. We want to trade with you, with your bitterroot, your food, whatever you got, we'll give to you. We'll trade for one of these animals." And naturally, they were still on horseback. They were still riding. So they were confused on how they were going to do that. Well, how do you separate? And at that time, The guy threw his blanket off and he jumped off the horse. That's how you do it. So naturally, they were still a little nervous, you know. So they all gathered and said, well, what should we do? You know, they wanted, and then the next person, they said, this is a very good mode of transportation. Imagine hauling all of your belongings on one horse. Or they called it a horse. This is what you can haul. Compared to a dog, you can haul anything. Besides, you can make good time riding a horse. So they gathered again, they discussed it, and they finally decided, all right, we'll trade. The people that had the horses said, we will teach you how to ride. We will teach your young people how to break, to tame the horses, because some of them are wild and some of them are tame. And if you want more, we can bring more. So with that, they went back over to their main camp and brought these horses in. And of course, all the people that were in camp seen this coming, and they didn't know what to think. And as they figured it must be okay because their people, their scouts were with them. And as they gradually got back into camp, and they discussed what this was, people milling around looking at these animals, and they didn't know what to do, what to say, think about it. Finally, after the discussion, they said, well, we can use this. You know, what we use a dog for. We put a travel on a dog and we can haul a couple of bundles on it. Imagine what you can do with a horse. And that sold the rest of the people. Okay, we'll trade. So they put off their hunt for a few days because they sold and traded everything that they had for horses. Those that had more that trade, sometimes some of them got 2 horses. Those that didn't have much to trade, they only got 1 horse. But with a guarantee that if they wanted more horses and had more things to trade, they would have more horses. That was the first time they encountered the horse. And from that time on, we realized what the changes it made in people's lives from that time on. Walking 5, maybe 10 miles a day, traveling, then you double that with a horse. That changed the lives for the Native people tremendously, good and bad. The bad part was that it also brought people faster too. So, with that, I want to again, thank you for, allowing me for this evening, for this great event, an important event. And I changed the subject a little bit just to think about the encounter of the horse, the time the horse arrived here, and the changes it made in all of our lives, from hunting, camping, farming, whatever you think. That loyal animal has done a tremendous job for us as humans and has made our lives a lot easier. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tony Casciola. Thank you, Tony. Thank you from all of us. Thank you for making the trip. There's a handful of you in here that knew my brother, Dick Riddle. One of his biggest, most successful projects was a show called Cowboy. And for those of you that remember, it just warms the cockles of my heart. It opened on the campus at the university. The new Montana Theater at that time was the first show to go in there, and it ran for weeks, held over and held over and held over. From there, it went on to a couple of more pre-Broadway trials and eventually wound up in New York City, where it had a respectable run on Broadway there in New York. And it was the story of Charlie Russell and how he painted the West and made his mark on our country. As the story goes, Charlie and his friends all spent a lot of time around the campfire with their horses tied not too far away. Charlie went into town and fell in love with a gal who eventually became Nancy Russell. He asked Nancy to marry him, and Charlie was so thrilled with the fact that Nancy said yes, that he stood up at the bar and gave her his horse. Word flew across the dirt, clear out to the campfire, and the boys at the campfire heard about this, and they did not like it one bit. I think actually the thing that they didn't like was that Charlie bringing a woman into their circle was going to ruin the dynamic of their friendship, and they were angry about it, but they took their anger out on the fact that Charlie gave away his horse. And that there was treasonous as far as they were concerned. And there was a fellow by the name of Con Price, who was Charlie's best friend, and he stood up at the campfire and he addressed the other boys. And he said, when a pal breaks the code and takes him a woman, that is sure gonna stir up a fuss. If he wants to quit living, well, that's his funeral. I guess he's 3 times 7 plus. And even though the man is a goner, though he's gone and took the plunge, let him swim it. But some things are matters of honor. And in the code of the West, well, there's a limit. Now, I would give you the shirt right off my shoulder, and if your thirsty friend a swig out of my bottle, I'd give a hand to your friend should you need restitution. Give you comfort, probably some sort of a contribution. Old buddy, there's not much I wouldn't give you. Any assistance I can give, the answer's yes. Hell yes, unless you should ask the one thing I'd refuse you, of course. Don't ever ask me for my horse. Now, when a man's got a horse, he's got a comrade who'll bring him home through a storm and warn of danger. The man that give that away would double-cross his brother, just as bravely into slavery sell his gray-haired mother. And if he's light in pounds as he's in morals, well, we could hang him with a piece of silken thread till dead had spread the story of a varmint so low down and so coarse that he could just up and give away his horse. Now, a horse has got manners and he's loyal. He's got consideration for all men around him. Instead of tracking down meat, he dines on prairie grasses, drinks more sweetly and discreetly, far from horses' asses. Consideration, friends, is when your partner slaps his tail across your back to kill a fly. That's why I cry shame when any man without an ounce of remorse could be so human that he'd give away his horse. Now you honor to your partner, and you honor Montana, and you honor Old Glory. But first, you give the honor to that horse. I'll tell you why that is. Because years ago, from what I've read, Mr. Man, he wasn't much. Frogs ran around about 40 hands high like lizards, toads, and such. Man lived up high overlooking arenas where dinosaurs and laughing hyenas all ran, roared, laughed, sometimes ate an elephant for breakfast if they had a mind to. Mr. Man ate bugs and snails and sometimes a low-flying duck. Any grasshopper lit near him or his kin was flat out plumb out of luck. One day this gent with a tomahawk slunk out away from the cave and brought home a skunk. And they'd feed, feast, gorge, but each like these was far apart and rare as hen's teeth. Now, Mr. Man was afoot in those days I mentioned, stayed pretty close to the cave. Those critters in the valley could run too fast for a fella that wasn't that brave. With a 7-ton critter snorting at the door, Mr. Man made do and not a bit more. He loved wife, home, kids, and in them days Ma never had any cause to worry where Pa is. Them were the days it was man and a woman got along because Ma never had any cause to worry where Pa is. Yeah, 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 yeah. One day this gent is sunning himself and laying for a bug down further. He looks down from the cave to the valley where these animals is all busy eating one another. Now he notices one is a grass-eating beast who ain't taking any part in this everyday feast. He just kicks, ducks, runs. Mr. Man being progressive, well, that starts his brain into thinking. You see, it puts him in mind of the days when his ma used to pack him around on her back. Being a lazy gent, he thinks a plan, decides he ought to give it a whack. With this hornless animal under him, good Dick could ride like he did in his early boyhood, so he thinks, plans, schemes, and right then, friends, when men start thinking about something besides eating. Them were the days that was man took a notion and grabbed the reins. That's when man starts thinking about something besides eating. Yeah, 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 yeah. Not far from the cave, there is a trail where the horses come to water by day. From a big old tree with a grapevine loop, Pa snares one away. Now it ain't got claws, but Pa soon sees it's got 4 feet and it's handy with these, and it kicks, ducks, bucks, and Pa gets home that night all hoof-marked and ain't had a ride yet. But sore as he is, the next day Pa goes back and tries it again. He gets astride and thinks old horse is tired and set to give in. But old horse is ready and set to rear. He sinks his head, goes straight in the air, and there's hair, mane, tail a-flying. But in a few days, well, this horse turns off plumb gentle. So Pa mounts that steed, goes off with stone-head spear and kills him a boar. He comes back to the cave with a hide more meat those folks had ever seen before. Well, this family so pleased with this useful pet, they bring him inside the cave at sunset. They bring leaves, grass, drinks. Pretty soon Mr. Horse is sure happy he's found him a new home. Bring him dinner and bring him dinner and drinks at bed. Salt his stew and butter his bread. That's how to make him happy. He's found him a new home. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, since that day when that old bug eater got aboard and took that ride, his kin been climbing up then to now, and that horse been right alongside. He pulled him out from that hole in the ground. For thousands of years he carried him around, and he pulled, pumped, plowed, and everything that ever got done, that horse did it all and then some. I'm telling you now, there ain't a railroad shack that horse didn't help to raise. He laid the ties for that steam engine that put him out to graze. Well, those steam lovers that had seen him killed to fertilize what he helped build, I said, shame, 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 for thinking that by turning him out that you can find a critter on earth that ever proved more worth than a better damn friend of man. Well, you can turn to the left and turn to the right and back to the center you turn. And you can turn enough dimes and make $1. And you can turn up a lamp and make it brighter. And you could do a good turn and make a grateful neighbor. Turn a hand and till the land and reap the fruits of labor. But if you turn around and find your woman wants to take a turn with other boys, there's nothing you can do. But if she wants your pony, you've got grounds for divorce. Well, you can turn your back and leave her. Tell her sorry if you grieve her, 'cause you can't turn your back on your horse. I'd like to thank my brother Dick Riddle for writing that. And I'd like to thank the Lord God in heaven for brain cells that hang around for this long in a person's life. Dr. Hal Stearns was my American history teacher at Sentinel High School a few years ago. He also taught that same class in Germany and later showed up for work daily as a University of Montana adjunct professor. He was honored as Montana's Teacher of the Year and an outstanding U.S. history teacher as a National Endowment of the Humanities Fellow. He served in the Montana National Guard for 35 years. An artillery officer by training, he commanded units in artillery, public affairs, and was the state area commander of over 3,000 troops. His parents were weekly newspaper publishers, and his grandparents were Swedish homesteaders in central Montana. Ladies and gentlemen, storyteller, lecturer, researcher on Montana and the West, Brigadier General retired, Dr. Hal Stearns.
Wow. He still owes a paper, too. You better get it in here one of these days. Well, thank you very much, and I'm thrilled to be here. And everybody that spoke in one way or another has impacted me. Tony, I don't know if he'll ever forgive me. We sat close to each other at Lady Grizz basketball games, and I absolutely said, Tony, you're part of this no matter what. And for Larry, I just love that horse, and really the reason he did that one, the only horse without a saddle, and that was because he always said he wanted to ride free and wild, and I always thought that was the neatest thing about his horse. Bill and I go back a long time. I taught his kids, and he's been such a tremendous person in terms of Traveler's Rest, as well as being such an advocate for history for all of us in Montana. And Smoke, during the days of the Lewis and Clark commemoration particularly, I had a number of tour groups coming in from all over the country. We often were out on the trail, the Lolo Trail, with Smoke, and it seemed like when people would look back and say, what was the thing they liked the best? We could be starting at Monticello all the way back in Charlottesville, Virginia, going all the way to Astoria, and they would always say the same thing. They loved their time with Smoke out on the Lolo Trail. So you can imagine why I appreciate this bunch like nobody's business. And when we were kind of putting all this together, Teresa and I go back a long time because we were both kids from beautiful Harleton, Montana. And, you know, thank you, Noreen. And I have here something that's kind of favorite for me because this was the second horse I fell in love with. The first one was Dolly when I was 3 years old, and then I moved up by the time I was 6 to Silver. And this was one of the items that Silver had. And then a fellow that used to work at my granddad's ranch for $10 a day. He was the best horseman that I ever saw, and he gave me this as a gift years later, and I never forgot that. It meant a great deal to me. So my story tonight really kind of deals with a lot of different sides. I'd like to tell you right away, the Kentucky Derby's coming up, and let's see now, it's May 7th. So that's 12 days and 20 hours from now, just to bring you up to date. And you know, you dress up, it's a big deal, and my gorgeous wife Sheila and I had a chance to go to it. And this year, ladies, in case any of you are going, every lady is going to wear a Kate Middleton hat. And that means they're chic, they're dainty, and they have feathers. And so when Sheila was there, she had one of these big hats. Well, we were there, lucky enough, for the 129th, which was in 2003. And how that all happened was kind of interesting because during the Lewis and Clark commemoration, I was on the national board, and there was a woman from Clarksville, Indiana, right across the way from Louisville, Kentucky, and her name was Phyllis Yeager. And she was married to a cowboy who came out of Shodo, Montana. Well, we became fast and ready friends, and she kept saying, sometime you have to come back to the Kentucky Derby. So we decided we got to do it. Well, the race we went to was the 129th in 2003, and Funny Side won it by a length and 3/4, and we loved it all. The pomp, the music, you've all seen that. Everybody sings My Old Kentucky Home. You drink the mint juleps, which was not real popular for me, but mostly what you do is people watch besides the race. And I'm not kidding, the people watching is astounding. So, for me, you know, I'm always looking for the backstory because, you know, that's what us historians are all about. You know, we spend a lot of our time in the back lanes, not the fast lanes. And I needed to get there good and early on race day because I wanted to go to the museum. Well, it meant a lot to me because a lot of people aren't aware of this. 1872, Colonel Meriwether Lewis Clark had made a trip to France, and he had seen the horse races in France, and he came back and convinced his two uncles, John and Dan Churchill, that they should be involved, the three of them, and get a great horse race started. Now, who was Meriwether Lewis, this young colonel? He was the grandson of my pal Meriwether Lewis. So, at any rate, all this meant a great deal to me, you can just imagine. So, I go into the museum and I had to check out the winners. Well, Sheila gets tired of me looking at every little thing, you know, because I spent a lot of my time in the pass lane. And she's walking around, and I'm over there and I'm taking a look at the long list, and they have a beautiful gold lettering, and I'm going down like this, every single one of the horses. And I finally get down to the point where I wanted to be, and I got down on my hands and knees, and I took a couple of pictures, then I just flat out sat down and was taking a couple more pictures of the same thing. Well, what I wanted to focus in on was the horse that won the race in 1889. Well, that horse ended up winning by a nose. It was a horse that only won 5 races in its entire 11-race career. It's all it ever won. And that beat the heavy favorite, a horse by the name of Proctor Knott. It won, though, in the fastest time there had ever been up to that time, 2 minutes, 34 seconds. So I was really kind of intrigued with this horse because the horse had the name Spokane. And it was owned by a man by the name of Noah Armstrong, who was a mining magnate from down in the area around Dillon, Twin Bridges, Virginia City area, and he loved horses. And he got out of the mining game and got into horses. And you know, we got the drift already tonight. If once you're into horses, you're into horses. That's all he cared about. Well, my grandparents had this ranch at Whitehall. And you know, in those days, what you had to do, you piled hay bales for 3 cents, 5 cents a bale and all that. and you're worried about getting suntans. And I was a high school kid and then a Notre Dame student, and we would try to get these suntans because when you went back to college, you didn't want to look like you had a cowboy tan. And you went off from Whitehall because there weren't very many girls. You always went down to the Madison County Fair down in Twin Bridges. Well, I always passed this barn on the way down. And I was so intrigued, finally one day, I just pulled in. I wanted to go in and see the barn. Well, as it turned out, the barn was built by this Noah Armstrong. And he built it so it would be a perfect place in the winter that he could run his horses around inside so they could be in training for any races. Well, long story. Here I am taking these pictures, and this fella comes up and says, I have been watching you with a lot of interest. And I said, why? And he said, well, you look down at every one of these horses, and then you get down and you take a picture of them, and then you move over a little bit, and then you sat down on the floor and just took the same picture. And he said, I'm just kind of curious about what's going on. I said, I'm from Montana. And this fellow says, Montana? I love Montana. So we started shooting the breeze a little bit, and he said, well, why are you interested in this one horse? And I said, well, this is Spokane. This is the horse. It was foaled way back in 1886. It was a chestnut horse, and Noah Armstrong was the guy that raised this horse, entered him in a few races, won a couple, lost a couple, and somehow he was able to convince the Kentucky Derby people to let his horse enter, and he was the ultimate dark horse, and guess what happened? And this fellow says, well, he must have won it. I said, yep, he won it. My horse won it, and I claim him because I'm a Montana guy. And he says, I love Montana. And I said, well, you know, you look kind of familiar to me. And he said, well, my name is Steven Spielberg. And I said, well, Steven, I'm Hal Stearns. And so we start chatting. And I said, I love your movies. You know, I went to Jaws and E.T. and Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. And if I saw him just a few days ago, I'd have said Bridge of Spies, and I loved it. That's what I'd said to him if I see him now. Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, all those, Indiana Jones and everything. And he said once again, I love Montana. I said, well, I do too, Stephen. And at any rate, I said, well, tell me, there was a movie you made about Montana that I really liked. He said, I know which one you're talking about, Always. And I said, yeah, and I know a lot about it. He said, you do? I said, yeah. I happen to know it was an A-26 bomber, it was fire retardants, and it was Richard Dreyfuss, and it was Holly Williams, and let's see, it was John Goodman. He says, wow, you must have liked that movie. And I said, yeah, I know a little bit more about that movie too. I said, I know that the hero died, and he kind of came back, and he helped the new pilot out as he was starting out as a fire retardant pilot. And he was interested in the young woman whose boyfriend had lost his life. And Steven Spielberg said, boy, if everybody knew that story like you know it, I would really think I was a pretty darn good director. So we're sitting there just laughing it up. And he said, who are you going to be for? And I said, I don't know anything about this. And he said, my first time here too. Just then, this gorgeous young lady right here came around the corner, and she looked at me, she looked at this other fella, and I said, Sheila, come on over here. I want you to meet a new friend. This is Steven Spielberg, Sheila. That's my story about a horse.
Steven Spielberg, huh? I now introduce to you a gal that began working with the Carousel 25 years ago. As a member of that original board of directors, she became executive director 2 weeks after the Carousel opened on May 27th, 1995, over 20 years ago. She considers the job of executive director of the Carousel to be the fourth best job in the world after being the wife to Randy, mother to Jason, Jess, Jamie, and grandmother to Pierce and Everett. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Carousel for Missoula is Teresa Cox.
This is overwhelming. Thank you so much. Wow, after all these great storytellers and you stand up for me, that's amazing. I am overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed by the support that all of you have shown tonight, by the wonderful stories we've heard, by this incredible band. It has been such a fun evening. So you wonder how something like this starts out. Well, we were having dinner with Hal and Sheila, and we started talking about ways to continue to support the Carousel because they have been incredible Carousel supporters for a very long time. And we started talking about stories because stories are really our collective culture. It's how we define who we are. And we talked about the way we could put this together, and Sheila said, well, let's do stories about horses, and we'll call it, Let Me Tell You a Story About a Horse. And then Sheila also got the band for us. So, you know, the real hero of the evening is Sheila's story. And of course, Sheila, stand up. And of course, all of you, because you have come out once again to support the Carousel, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you doing that. So the Carousel is a big story. If you were around when the Carousel was being built, you couldn't open the paper, you couldn't listen to the radio without hearing something about the Carousel. So we are a big story, and we continue to be occasionally. You'll see us in the news. But that big story is made up of thousands and thousands and thousands of little stories. And those little stories are the stories that are important to me. They're the stories about people who have found a new reason to live. They were retired and they heard about the Carousel and they wanted to start carving. So people who were diagnosed with in-life cancer started carving on the Carousel, and they are still there 25 years later. So it's really a wonderful story about those people.
Good job.
It's a story about the children who collected pennies and collected 1 million pennies and adopted 4 horses on the Carousel. 1 million pennies fits into a cubic yard and weighs over 6,000 pounds. Every year, the Carousel gives over 10,000 tokens to disadvantaged children and youth, and anyone with a physical or mental disability is always welcome to ride for free on the Carousel. Because you are so generous helping us put the Carousel together, it is important to us always to give back. So those stories are all important to me, but I want to read you a letter that was published in the Missoulian just 2 weeks after we opened. Unfortunately, I have my contacts in instead of my glasses, so I will do my best with this. Kudos to Chuck Caprich and all the volunteers for an absolutely wonderful Carousel. The care and craftsmanship that made it so beautiful are evident on every hand. There's one aspect of this wonderful creation that is evident only to a privileged few, those who have disabilities and their families. My 5-year-old daughter, Eleanor, is usually confined to a wheelchair. As a family, we take her a lot of places and have a lot of fun with her, but she is always confined, limited, different. However, when Eleanor sits on one of those beautiful hand-carved horses and goes up and down and around the circle, she is on equal ground with the rest of the world. It happens far too few times in her life that Eleanor enjoys anything as it was designed to be enjoyed. Eleanor delights in the Carousel shamelessly, totally, and as any other child her age does. Even though deafness precludes her enjoyment of the music, the visual richness of the colors, the detail of the horses, the gargoyles, and the building all add up to a sensory delight for her. That her enjoyment of this wonder is free of cost for her is the icing on the cake. I cannot thank Chuck and all the volunteers enough for the amazing gift of the Carousel. If Eleanor could talk, I know that she too would add her heartfelt appreciation. You have made one little girl very happy.
Everyone, Teresa Cox, thank you so much, Teresa, for 20 years, for the 20 years of focus on the Carousel. And we talked at this about in the meetings about how over 20 years ago when it just overtook Missoula, and people were carving these horses in their garages. And I know you remember this. There were carving parties that gathered, and I'm sure a lot of them had Randy Cox's wine at them too. And but I mean, all over the town, all over the county, clear down to Lolo and beyond, and off that all the other directions, people were carving. I know Devlin, even you were involved in the carving. You even had something to do with the carving, and.
They sanded everything over, though, and so you can't see my name anywhere. Especially
you can Google us. Google the Singing Sons of Beaches. We're the only thing that comes up. So with that said, we'd like to close this evening's special sold-out event with one final thought from these Singing Sons of Beaches, and that is this. We here in Montana know how to throw a party. From border to border, we are all proud of the Carousel for Missoula.
Yeah!
This one goes out to all you fine Montana folks, either born and raised or here by some happy coincidence. Thank you for all your generosity and hard work putting this thing together tonight. It's been fabulous. This is for you. Well, I was thumbing me a ride down this rainy old Ekalaka road. Ekalaka, come on. Raise your hand. Who's been to Ekalaka? Be honest. Whoa! There are real Montanans here. Just kitty corner from Missoula. Just kitty corner. About 900 miles, yeah. When along came a 4x4 that was beat to hell and not that old. If you're going to Ekalaka Mac, you can ride along with me. So I threw my saddle in the back and I climbed up in that seat. He asked me if I'd seen a road with so much of that eastern Montana gumbo mud. Anybody know about gumbo? You ever had gumbo? I'll tell you what, mister, you've got so much gumbo up in the side of the wheel wells of your pickup there that you're going to have to drive all the way to Ekalaka and drop me off, and then you're going to have to back up to Baker 80 miles because no way you're going to turn around with all of that gumbo up in there, and you better get to a car wash before that stuff dries, I guarantee you that. There's a Pomida parking lot up in Baker. You might be able to turn around there and get to Miles City. I know a friend of mine has a good car wash there in Miles City. I said there ain't a road in old Montana that I ain't traveled, bud. I've been to Montana, man. Yes, I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Charlotte, Shoto, Glasgow, Martinsdale, Chico, Webo, Saco, Fishtail, Missoula, Malta, Nashua, Rockvale, Helena, Plevna, Angela, Pinesdale, Baker, Gardner, Haver, Hinsdale, Springdale, Grantsdale, Ferndale. Hear me wail, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Molt, Volt, Babb and Boyd, Troy, Roy, Fife and Freud, Hysham, Hingham, Harlem, Norris, Wyndham, Wisdom, Bozeman, Broadus, Anaconda, Vida, Venanda, Ovando, Elmo, Evero, Buffalo. Here we go. I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around this state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Browning, Ringling, Belt, Opportunity, Billings, Sterling, Butte, Absorkey, Homestake, Intake, Rygate, Whitefish, Castle Rock, Crow Rock, Two Dot, Whitlash, Lewistown, Frenchtown, Jimtown, Brown Butte, Square Butte, Gold Butte, Hart Butte, what a hoot! I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around the state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I gotta catch my breath there, Devlin. I've been to Helmville, Centerville, Marysville. They love you, Devlin.
12 years of piano lessons.
By golly. Well, I've been to Helmville, Centerville, Marysville, Hathaway, Powderville, Stevensville, Walkerville, Woods Bay, Dayton, Dutton, Dillon, Polebridge, Big Arm, Big Sky, Bighorn, Coleridge, Deer Lodge, Red Lodge, Belfry, Busby, Libby, Isme, Quigley. Believe me, I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around the state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. Many's a time I've made that drive from Lookout Pass to Old Glendive, from the beautiful Bighorn Canyon walls to the Canadian line, up past Great Falls, from the little southeastern town of Biddle. Now we're here in Missoula with Devlin and Riddle, from Westby to Yak, Monad, Alzate, and back. I've been all over Montana. Let's not forget Livingston, Harleton, Hamilton, York, Jordan, Lincoln, Hardin, Forks, Circle, Sydney, Summers, Hobson, Knowlton, Moulton, Polson, Dodson, Broadview, Fairview, Pineview, Park City, Cook City, Silver City, Miles City, very pretty. I've been to Montana, man. I'm an old Montana man. I've been all around the state, my friend. I've seen the mountains grand, from the Badlands to the Wheatlands. I've been to Montana. I've been to Montana. Good night, everybody. Good night, Missoula. Thank you. Good night from the Cafe Dolce. So long. Thanks for coming. Dolce Vita.
Like to give a special shout out to these singing sons of beaches.
Oh, yeah.
Special shout out to Mr. Joe Brown for his vision, and Walter, and their talent as public address and live music sound engineers with gear. The underwriters that have made this evening possible, the Washington Corporations, the Boone Carlberg PC, the Western Montana Clinic, and Windfall Incorporated. They all receive our undying thanks from the entire Missoula Valley community. Special thanks goes out to KPAX Television, in particular Mr. Bob Hermes, for their support. The Montana Marketing Group for the ton of work they do for the Carousel. Naturally, we thank our board of directors for this evening's events, Betsy Grimley, and again to Mr. Randy Cox for donating all the wine tonight. Pete Lambros, Emily Lauren, and Kersey Marcus here at the Cafe Dolce.